Over the top? No, we had no over the top rules. We were totally reasonable, thoughtful parents who made solid decisions at every turn.
On the surface, Ron Howard's life has always looked picture perfect. Red-haired Opie on The Andy Griffith Show, Richie Cunningham in Happy Days, and later the beloved director behind Hollywood classics. But behind the curtain, his path was filled with secrets, betrayals, and moments that nearly destroyed him. For decades, he kept quiet, determined not to shatter the wholesome image fans clung to. Yet in truth, Hollywood was far more brutal than anyone imagined. In 1973, during the filming of George Lucas's American Graffiti, two of his co-stars, Harrison Ford and Paul Le Mat, targeted him in a cruel display of mockery. They hurled bottles near his car, locked him inside a trailer, and shouted insults, "Dance, Opie, dance!" It wasn't just teasing. It was humiliation, what Howard would later call Opie shaming. For a 19-year-old struggling to escape his child star image, the sting was unforgettable. This shocking event wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern stretching back to his earliest days in Hollywood, when the industry tested his resilience at every turn. There were the accidents on set that could have ended his life, the lawsuits that drained his finances, the false rumors that jeopardized his career, and the battles for respect that seemed endless. For 50 years, Ron stayed silent, pushing forward, directing and creating. But silence doesn't erase scars. To understand the weight of these experiences, you have to go back to the very beginning, before the fame, before Opie, before Richie Cunningham. You have to step into the world of a little boy from Oklahoma whose parents took a gamble on a dream, moving across the country with almost nothing. That gamble would change their lives forever, but not without incredible costs. Ron Howard's story isn't just about Hollywood success. It's about survival, humiliation, resilience, and ultimately the fight to protect his own identity in an industry that never wanted to let him grow up. For 5 decades, Howard let the world see only the polished side, the wholesome kid turned acclaimed director. He rarely spoke about the darker parts because that wasn't the image people wanted. But the truth is, behind every smiling photo, there were battles most fans never knew about. He faced accidents on set so dangerous that he nearly drowned as a child actor. He watched co-stars collapse under pressure, saw studio executives gamble away lives for profit, and endured bullying from people who didn't respect his early fame. Financial struggles plagued his family even while the world assumed television riches were pouring in. Lawsuits cost millions, dragging his name through headlines he never wanted. And even at home, rumors and lies nearly tore apart the life he was trying to build with his high school sweetheart. Hollywood had always been marketed as glamorous, but for Ron Howard, it was often ruthless. A machine that didn't care about innocence or effort, only about money and reputation. The irony was that while audiences saw him as the safe all-American boy, behind closed doors he was being tested in ways no child should endure. He carried those lessons into adulthood, shaping how he approached directing, how he built a family, and how he defined success. What makes his journey so remarkable is that he didn't collapse under the weight of these pressures. He adapted. He fought back when studios pushed too far, when executives tried to strip away his spotlight, when actors mocked him for being different. He made careful choices that allowed him to grow, not just as a performer, but as a leader on set, a husband, and eventually one of the most respected directors in Hollywood. But before he could get there, Ron had to survive the early years. And those years weren't glamorous at all. They were filled with tiny homes, financial desperation, and the determination of 2 parents who refused to let Hollywood chew up their child. Ronald William Howard was born on March 1, 1954, in Duncan, Oklahoma, a small town where opportunities for aspiring actors were almost non-existent. His father, Rance Howard, had once been in the Air Force, but his heart was in acting and writing. His mother, Jean Spiegel Howard, was also a performer, though roles were scarce. The family had more dreams than money, and by the late 1950s they were scraping by. In 1958, when Ron was only 4, his parents made a life-altering decision. They packed their modest belongings and drove to California, hoping to find steadier work in Hollywood. They landed in a cramped house in Burbank, barely making ends meet. From the outside, it looked like a foolish gamble, but that move quietly rewrote their destiny. Unlike most children, Ron didn't grow up in a playground or traditional preschool. He grew up on studio backlots, watching cameras roll, listening to directors shout instructions, and absorbing the strange, magical world of storytelling. At just 18 months old, he had already appeared in a film, Frontier Woman, 1956, because his father needed a baby for a brief scene. That wasn't supposed to be the start of a career, but fate had other plans. By age 5, Ron's parents were under tremendous pressure. Casting agents saw his natural charm and wanted him in contracts, but Rance and Jean refused. They had one strict rule: no full-time acting until he was at least 5. They didn't want their son to be swallowed by the child star machine. It was a noble choice, but financially devastating. The Howards were often on the edge of collapse, pawning items just to pay rent, considering abandoning Hollywood altogether, yet they hung on. And in 1959, when Ron finally turned 5, opportunities slowly shifted. He was cast in The Journey, and for the first time his name appeared in the credits. It wasn't an easy start. Crew members mocked his freckles and red hair, calling him cruel names. But it was the beginning of something bigger. That same year, Ron's younger brother Clint was born. With another mouth to feed and debts climbing, the family struggled even harder. Still, they believed their decision to shield Ron from exploitation would protect him in the long run. They weren't entirely wrong. Everything changed in 1960. At just 6 years old, Ron landed the role of a lifetime, Opie Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show. More than 300 kids auditioned, but Ron's natural presence stood out. When the show premiered on October 3, 1960, it instantly became a cultural touchstone. Audiences adored the sweet, innocent boy with the trusting eyes. For the Howards, it was financial salvation. Ron's salary started at $300 per episode, eventually reaching $1,000 by the show's end in 1968. Over 8 seasons, he appeared in 243 of the 249 episodes. But the success came with enormous pressure. While other children went to school and played outside, Ron spent long days memorizing scripts, performing emotional scenes, and meeting the demands of network executives. The show projected an image of small-town simplicity, but behind the cameras, life wasn't so calm. Andy Griffith, the star, became a mentor to Ron, patiently guiding him through difficult scenes. Yet Andy also wrestled with his own demons, drinking and temper flare-ups that occasionally frightened the young actor. Ron saw the complexity of adults far earlier than most children his age. Despite the challenges, the bond between Andy and Ron grew deep. Years later, they discovered they were distant cousins, a revelation that explained the almost familial closeness they had always felt. But the warmth of that connection couldn't erase the toll of being a child star. Ron's innocence was tested again in 1962 when a lake scene nearly ended in tragedy. While filming a fishing sequence, the boat tipped, and 8-year-old Ron slipped into the water. He couldn't swim well enough to save himself. Andy Griffith jumped in without hesitation, pulling the boy to safety. The incident was kept secret to protect the show's reputation. But for Ron, it was unforgettable. At a time when child safety rules were practically non-existent, this near drowning planted a seed in his mind. Years later, as a director, he would insist on detailed safety protocols, determined never to let another child face what he had endured. By 1968, The Andy Griffith Show had run its course, and Ron, now 14, faced an uncertain future. The industry that had once embraced him was now skeptical. To casting directors, he wasn't a versatile actor. He was still just Opie. That label became a curse, leading to over 50 failed auditions in 1968 and 1969. Ron's parents tried to shield him, but the rejections wore him down. He took small roles for far less pay than he once earned. Gentle Ben in 1969 for just $500 per episode, and later The Smith Family, which also flopped. The sudden drop in status gave him severe anxiety, though he kept it hidden from most people. On the outside, he played basketball at high school, averaging 12 points a game, but inside, He felt trapped by an image he couldn't escape. The dangers weren't just emotional. In April 1971, Ron was rear-ended by a truck while driving to an audition. He suffered whiplash, racked up $3,000 in medical bills, and had no insurance to cover it. To pay expenses, he even sold his bike for $200. The pain lingered for years, affecting his movements in later roles. Meanwhile, rumors began swirling about his personal life. When he started dating Cheryl Alley, classmates spread gossip that she was pregnant. Tabloids picked up the story in 1971, and Ron lost a $2,000 guest role because of it. Even as a teenager, he was learning how quickly Hollywood could punish actors for scandals, even false ones. It seemed that danger and humiliation followed him everywhere. And yet, just when things looked darkest, a chance arrived that would alter everything. By the time Ron Howard entered his mid-teens, the shine of being America's favorite child star had dulled. Casting directors, once eager to book the little red-haired boy, now saw him as a relic of the past. He wasn't considered mature enough for leading man roles, yet he was too old for the cute child parts that had made him famous. In Hollywood terms, he was in limbo. From 1968 through 1972, Ron endured failure after failure. Each audition was a reminder that his image as Opie Taylor still clung to him like glue. More than 50 casting calls ended in rejection. Some producers didn't even bother to watch his auditions. They simply dismissed him as too recognizable. This identity trap weighed heavily on him. To outsiders, Ron seemed to be living a normal teenage life, playing basketball at high school, laughing with friends, even averaging 12 points a game for the team. But behind that smile was a deep frustration. He felt like he was stuck between two worlds, too young to be taken seriously as an adult actor, too old to be the lovable child star America remembered. The situation got worse when he took smaller roles just to stay working. In 1969, he joined Gentle Ben for $500 per episode, far less than the $1,000 per episode he had once commanded on The Andy Griffith Show. In 1971, he signed on to The Smith Family, a short-lived project that offered $8,000 for 39 episodes. It was steady work, but the show failed quickly, reinforcing the idea that Ron's career was fading. Anxiety became his secret companion. He worried constantly about money, about his future, about being forgotten. But Ron was stubborn. He refused to quit even when he felt like walking away. His resilience would eventually pay off, but at that moment, he couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then came 1973, a year that would both scar him and change everything. In 1973, Ron Howard was 19 when A Lifeline appeared, George Lucas's low-budget film American Graffiti. The film was set in 1962 and followed a group of teenagers navigating one wild night. For Ron, who played Steve Bolander, it was his chance to prove he could handle more than wholesome sitcom roles, but behind the scenes, things were far from glamorous. Co-stars Harrison Ford and Paul Le Mat zeroed in on Ron, mocking him for his child star past. They threw bottles near his car, taunted him with cruel shouts of, "Dance, Opie, dance!" and even locked him in a trailer during rehearsals. One night, they spiked his drinks, leaving him humiliated in front of the crew. This bullying became what Ron later called his one true moment of Opie shaming. He tried to brush it off, tried to stay professional, but inside it cut deep. For a young actor desperate to shed his childhood image, the torment reinforced his worst fears, that he would never be respected as an adult performer. Financially, the deal wasn't much better. Despite the film's success, which grossed over $115 million on a $777,000 budget, Ron received a flat $10,000 paycheck. He asked Lucas for a 1% share of profits, which would have made him a millionaire. Lucas said no. The rejection stung and created a distance between the two men. Yet, despite the humiliation and the lost money, American Graffiti was a breakthrough. It gave Ron credibility as a young adult actor, showing Hollywood that he could anchor a film. More importantly, it introduced him to a network of filmmakers, Lucas, Coppola, and eventually Spielberg, who would shape his directing career. But at the time, Ron wasn't thinking about directing. He was thinking about survival, about steady work, and about building a life with the girl who had stood by him through it all. Cheryl Alley. Ron first met Cheryl Alley in 1970 when they were both teenagers in high school. Their connection was immediate, but their relationship didn't come without challenges. Within months of dating, rumors spread that Cheryl was pregnant. The gossip exploded across their school, and by early 1971, even tabloids had picked up the story. The consequences were harsh. Ron lost a $2,000 guest role on television because producers didn't want to be associated with scandal, even though the rumor was completely false. Cheryl was devastated by the invasion of their privacy, but she and Ron refused to let it break them. Instead, the experience forged a bond between them that would only grow stronger. Ron was determined to support her, even when money was tight. In January 1971, he started delivering newspapers before school, earning $150 a month by delivering 200 papers a day. It was grueling, but it gave him just enough cash to take Cheryl out on dates. Through the years, Ron proposed 3 times. Cheryl turned him down the first 2, not because she didn't love him, but because she wanted to be sure they could withstand the pressures of fame. Finally, in October 1974, she said yes. On June 7, 1975, they were married, beginning what would become one of the longest and strongest marriages in Hollywood. Ron often refers to Cheryl as his good luck charm, the anchor who kept him grounded while the industry tried to pull him apart. While others his age were succumbing to drugs, scandals, or Hollywood excess, Ron found stability in family. That stability became his secret weapon as he prepared for the role that would revive his career and lead him toward directing. Richie Cunningham in Happy Days. In January 1974, Ron began playing Richie Cunningham on a brand new sitcom called Happy Days. The pilot aired on January 15th, pulling in 11 million viewers. At first, the show centered on Richie's teenage adventures in 1950s Milwaukee. For Ron, it was steady work at $1,000 per episode, and the role gave him the credibility he needed after years of struggling. But by 1976, the dynamics shifted. Henry Winkler's character, Fonzie, exploded in popularity, turning into a cultural phenomenon. Ratings skyrocketed to 31 million viewers a week, but the spotlight shifted away from Richie. ABC executives saw dollar signs. In 1976, Fonzie merchandise generated over $1 million in revenue, and producers floated the idea of renaming the show Fonzie's Happy Days. For Ron, it was a slap in the face. He had carried the series from the start, and now he was being sidelined. In November 1976, he gave producers an ultimatum. If they changed the title, he would quit, even though his contract locked him in until 1980. The situation nearly tore the show apart. But then the story leaked to Variety on December 5th, 1976. Fans erupted. More than 10,000 letters flooded ABC, demanding that Richie Cunningham remain the heart of the show. The network relented, keeping the original title. Ron stayed, but the experience left scars. It taught him that in Hollywood, loyalty could evaporate the moment money entered the picture. It also cemented his desire to move behind the camera, where he could control stories rather than be controlled by executives. Looking back, Ron Howard's story is not just one of success, it's one of survival. From being bullied on the set of American Graffiti, to nearly drowning as a child actor, to watching his role nearly erased from Happy Days, he endured challenges that would have broken many others. But Ron didn't just endure. He transformed. Every humiliation, every accident, every rejection became fuel for his directing career. He built sets that prioritized safety because he remembered the terror of that lake accident. He treated actors with respect because he remembered the sting of being mocked and underestimated. He fought for creative control because he knew what it felt like to be pushed aside. And through it all, his marriage to Cheryl became the anchor of his life. In an industry notorious for broken families and fleeting romances, they've remained together for 50 years, raising 4 children and proving that stability in Hollywood isn't a myth, it's just incredibly rare. Today, Ron Howard is celebrated as one of America's most respected directors, the man behind films like A Beautiful Mind, Apollo 13, and Cinderella Man. But his journey to that place wasn't smooth. It was filled with obstacles that forced him to grow up faster than he should have, to fight harder than most, and to protect the very identity Hollywood tried to strip from him. The boy who was once mocked as Opie became a man who redefined himself, not through scandal, not through rebellion, but through persistence, integrity, and the quiet strength to keep going, no matter how dark things seemed. That is Ron Howard's real legacy, not just the films he made, but the resilience he lived. By the late 1970s, Ron Howard was still Richie Cunningham on Happy Days, but deep inside, he wanted more. Acting had given him fame, but directing was his real dream. In 1977, at just 23 years old, he made a bold move. He directed his first feature, Grand Theft Auto. The budget was tiny, just $602,000, but it made more than $15 million worldwide. Critics didn't love it, but Ron had proven something to himself. He could command a camera. He wasn't just Opie or Richie anymore, he was a filmmaker. During breaks on Happy Days, he would secretly sit with the crew, asking questions about lenses, lighting, and editing. He was obsessed with learning every part of the craft. Henry Winkler, his co-star, encouraged him, telling Ron he was meant to be behind the camera. By the time he left Happy Days in 1980, Ron had made up his mind. He would no longer be defined by the roles he played as a child. He was ready to carve out a new identity as one of Hollywood's youngest directors. The 1980s transformed Ron Howard into one of Hollywood's most reliable directors. His big breakthrough came in 1984 with Splash, a romantic comedy about a man falling in love with a mermaid, starring Tom Hanks and Daryl Hannah. The movie cost $8 million but earned nearly $70 million. It was a hit, and suddenly studios trusted Ron. Next came Cocoon in 1985, a sci-fi drama about seniors discovering the secret of youth. It won 2 Academy Awards. Ron had officially made his mark, but he didn't stop there. Throughout the 1990s, he built a reputation for balancing emotion with spectacle. In 1995, Apollo 13 became one of his biggest triumphs. Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, and Bill Paxton starred in the true story of NASA's doomed lunar mission. The phrase, "Houston, we have a problem," became iconic. The film earned 9 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. Ron had gone from a child actor mocked on set to a filmmaker respected by astronauts, presidents, and audiences around the world. But Ron's career wasn't always a straight climb upward. For every success, there was a film that didn't work. In 1988, he directed Willow, a fantasy epic produced by George Lucas. While it became a cult classic later, at the time it disappointed at the box office. In 1999, EdTV tried to predict the future of reality television, but audiences weren't interested. Then came The Dilemma in 2011, a comedy that flopped badly. Critics said Ron was playing it too safe, too mainstream. But failure never stopped him. Each time a movie missed, Ron studied what went wrong and pushed himself harder. He often said, "The truth is, you learn more from the movies that don't connect than the ones that do." These lessons prepared him for his greatest triumph in 2001. Behind all the Hollywood lights, Ron's family remained his anchor. He and Cheryl raised 4 children together: Bryce Dallas, Jocelyn Page, and Reed. Bryce Dallas Howard went on to become a successful actress and director herself, starring in Jurassic World and directing episodes of The Mandalorian. Ron often said that watching his daughter direct made him prouder than winning an Oscar. But family life wasn't always simple. The pressures of Hollywood, long hours on set, and financial risks took their toll. At one point in the 1990s, Cheryl confronted him, saying their marriage needed more balance. Ron listened. He cut down his workload and spent more time at home. Unlike many Hollywood marriages, theirs lasted 50 years and counting. Cheryl had been with him since high school, long before the fame and fortune, and she remained his greatest source of strength. The 2000s and 2010s solidified Ron Howard as one of the most versatile directors in the world. After A Beautiful Mind won him the Academy Award for Best Director and Best Picture in 2001, He became a household name not just in America, but everywhere. He went on to direct Cinderella Man, 2005, The Da Vinci Code, 2006, and Frost, Nixon, 2008. He explored documentaries, too, with projects like The Beatles, 8 Days a Week, and Pavarotti. Even when films didn't perform as expected, his name carried weight. In 2018, when Solo: A Star Wars Story was in trouble after the original directors were fired, Disney called Ron. He stepped in, reshot major parts, and delivered the movie on time. While the film had mixed reviews, his steady hand saved the production. He became known as the director Hollywood trusted when everything was falling apart. Today, Ron Howard looks back on a career spanning more than 6 decades. From the little boy on the Andy Griffith Show to an Oscar-winning director, his journey has been anything but easy. He endured bullying, financial struggles, accidents, and the crushing weight of child stardom. But he turned every obstacle into fuel. Hollywood tried to box him in, but he broke free. He created a career built not just on talent, but resilience. His story is not only about movies, it's about survival, family, and the courage to reinvent yourself. When asked how he wants to be remembered, Ron often says, "As someone who tried to tell the truth, whether through stories or through life." And that's exactly what he has done. By the 2000s, Ron Howard was no longer just the kid from Mayberry. He was one of the most decorated filmmakers alive. His Oscar wins for A Beautiful Mind in 2001 cemented him in Hollywood history. But the awards kept coming. Golden Globes, BAFTAs, Directors Guild of America honors, even a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He had them all. Yet, despite the recognition, Ron remained humble. He never acted like a superstar. At ceremonies, he often thanked not just actors, but crews, the camera operators, sound designers, editors, because he knew filmmaking was a team effort. In 2013, when he received the Goldene Kamera Award in Germany, he said, "The awards are wonderful, but the real reward is being able to keep telling stories." That attitude earned him something rarer than trophies, the lasting respect of his peers. For someone who spent his whole life in Hollywood, Ron Howard managed to avoid the scandals that swallowed so many others. Still, he wasn't immune to controversy. His adaptations of Dan Brown's novels, The Da Vinci Code, 2006, and Angels and Demons, 2009, faced global backlash from religious groups. Protests erupted outside theaters, and the Vatican even criticized him publicly. But Ron stood firm, saying the films were works of fiction, not attacks on faith. Then in 2018, when he took over Solo: A Star Wars Story, fans were divided. Some praised him for saving the film, while others blamed him for its underwhelming box office. Ron admitted the criticism stung, but he didn't regret stepping in. He believed directors had a responsibility to finish what others couldn't. Unlike many in Hollywood, Ron never lashed out at critics. Instead, he quietly kept working, letting time and his body of work defend him. Today, Ron Howard's influence stretches far beyond the films he made. He mentored younger directors, including his own daughter, Bryce Dallas Howard, who is carving out her own place in Hollywood. Through Imagine Entertainment, the company he co-founded with Brian Grazer in 1985, he has produced countless hits, TV shows like Arrested Development, and films like 8 Mile and Friday Night Lights. His impact is woven into both big screen and small screen storytelling. But perhaps his greatest legacy is showing that child stars don't have to crash and burn. They can grow, evolve, and thrive. Ron Howard turned survival into art, pain into power, and doubt into determination. When future generations study Hollywood history, his name will stand alongside the legends, not because he chased fame, but because he chased the story.